and our financial expert, Alan Adams. And expert Alan Adams. Okay. And I'm going to give you I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'll run through the materials that we did submit, give you some additional comments. And as you know, Judge Ark, we believe, found open meetings law violation. We believe the issue was that PCP, the developer, claimed that they needed a reasonable return on their project. There were meetings in executive session, financial information that was not disclosed to the public at the time, and as a result, determination was made that the 167 units were required. And that's why FOPV objected, because they did not have an opportunity to participate. And we only, last week, we did get the documentation apparently that had been in front of the board back in 2011. So one of the biggest objections was that the brownfield tax credits of $3 million, give or take, were not included in the calculations, which radically changed the numbers. So just again, quote from Judge Ark. Judge Ark said that this matter is referred back to the village board for a meeting open to the public, in which the petitioner will have a full opportunity to present information about its claimed available BCB tax credits and LWRP grant monies for the project, a reconsideration of the mass and scale of the project vis-a-vis the purported BCP and LWRP benefits, presents the parties with an opportunity to involve and educate the public as to the project's many attributes and potential benefits to the community. So we're asking the board to reconsider the mass and scale, which frankly are determined in large part by the number of units. We believe that the board at the time acted on incomplete and erroneous information, and we appreciate the opportunity to present our information. We don't concede that reasonable return is the test. However, it's our understanding that that's what the board acted upon. So we want to show that the project could yield a reasonable return with a much lower amount of units. Frankly, we believe in the neighborhood of 90 units is a feasible project. But I do note that in a reported case where PCP sued Pittsford Village Green, they apparently claimed that the property was worth less than zero because of the environmental costs. So we suggest that a reasonable return isn't even relevant if they have property that's worth less than zero. But be that as it may, I'll explain where we are. We do object that Mr. Malcolm presented a schedule. The judge accepted it, where PCP was supposed to make a presentation, and then a few weeks later we were given the opportunity to respond. They declined to make any presentation or any submission. They waited for our submission and basically sandbagged, and then responded when they should have made their initial presentation.
Alan, can I just address that briefly?
Sure.
So, in the context of the court discussed the schedule as to how we were to proceed, my recollection of that discussion was that both parties were ambivalent as to who went first, so to speak. It was agreed in the schedule that PCP would make a submission if they desired. They did not. You did. You have the burden of proof here. The fact that you went first and the fact that PCP responded after doesn't really alter the procedure much. You're going to have tonight to address those issues. You're also going to have a week after this meeting to address those issues.
I appreciate it, but it's another example of set, and they clearly were not followed in this case. No, it's in Mr. Malcolm's email.
You're not really arguing that PCP and the public should have an opportunity to follow up with comments in the case that arose in the open meeting law, are you?
They're given an opportunity. I'm just saying that they intentionally held back, and that's it. But let's move on. I think it's pretty clear they intentionally held back. But you're giving us an opportunity to respond, so I appreciate that. And I understand your position that that would remedy the issue. I don't want to dwell on that. I'm just making the point. Now, with respect to the analysis, again, a major omission here was the brownfield cleanup program tax credits. And it's something my firm deals with all the time. We know a lot about it. Under the brownfield cleanup program, normally an applicant will do a remedial investigation, fully delineate the nature and extent of contamination, then come up with a remedial alternatives analysis, look at the different options, and then once they fully understand the contamination, come up with a remedy, and then implement the remedy. And when they're done, they get a certificate of completion, which gives them a release of liability from the state and also qualifies them for tax credits. Under the program, the Generation 2 program that this site was qualified for, they received 10%, or actually I think it's Generation 1, the 10% of their cleanup costs and 10% of their development costs. So basically all their costs except land, they go into the development that are related, they would get a tax credit on. And it would vary depending upon the actual cost, but it's quite a significant number. Now, here, the documentation we received from 2011 that we did get last week indicated that at the time, PCP estimated cleanup costs at $600,000. We are now told that cleanup costs were $5 million. We don't have any documentation on that, but that's the number we were given. I think that needs to be substantiated, but even assuming that is an accurate number, I think the problem here was that PCP went directly to what we call an interim remedial measure, an IRM. Instead of going through the whole process, studying the site, coming up with a reasoned strategy for remediation, I think they cut corners and basically went right in to do the IRM. And that backfired because they only expected to dig down about 5 feet. They ended up having to go down 20 feet. They hit a water line, a drainage line, that resulted in water filling the hole and spreading contamination, making huge remedial costs to get rid of the water through contaminated water in frac tanks. I think if it had been done in the normal measured way, it wouldn't be close to the $5 million costs. So I don't think that the $5 million is a valid number to consider when you're thinking about what reasonable return would a developer going into this project anticipate having. If they basically, I don't think that was a prudent way to go about that. But we think even it was and the other question is, there was a lawsuit against Pittsford Village Green. It was resolved somehow. We don't know how. But I would like to know how much money was paid by Pittsford Village Green or its insurance company to defray the $5 million in costs. I mean, I don't know if it was $1, if it was $1 million, I have no idea. But that's information we should get, and maybe it was 0, but we would like to know that number. Now, the other issue we raised is that money is available for waterfront improvements. under the village can cooperate and apply for grant money, which I know you've done in other cases. Both the canal side program can allow up to $150,000 grant, matching grant. A land donation qualifies. Also, I think even more money can be available under the LWRP program for grants. The grant applications are due at the end of July. It comes up every year, but you do have the opportunity, and frankly, we would ask the board to consider making the application to try to get grant money to enhance the waterfront, and any costs that PCB had for that, to take care of that out of the grant money. Now, as far as, we did suggest some enhancements to the financials. These are just, we ran, Mr. Adams ran like 8 different scenarios, and some of them included some additional enhancements, more creative things that could be done. One was to go to Comida and apply for benefits. We believe that this, and I have done this with 2 brownfield projects on that were apartment complexes. One, we got approved for sales tax abatement. The other, we got not only sales tax abatement, we got a 13-year pilot abatement. I think this project, if the village stood behind it, and the community supported it with a compromise, would qualify and would be approved for Comida benefits for the both sales tax. I think is pretty much a given, and as well as a pilot to make this into a win-win situation, basically to try to make it more economical to have a reduced project with reduced taxes. So our analysis included that. We did include the, and I think we should have made this clearer. The sales tax abatement was, I think, was included in all the scenarios, because that's pretty much a gimme. If you took that out, the most conservative analysis we did, assuming the $5 million in cleanup costs, assuming with our other assumptions, we have a 10% return. And even if you took out the sales tax, it comes out to 9.994. So it's really a 10% return. As Mr. Adams, I think, will indicate, the developers expecting an 8 to 10% return. In some of these numbers, if it was more like the $600,000 cleanup number, if you got the Comida benefits, there's really an infinite return. You're getting all your, because what happens is the tax credits are so big, they will take care of your money down and you have no money in. You actually can get money back because the numbers are so advantageous. So Mr. Adams is going to explain the different ways he approached it. He's an experience with both as a banker, and he works placing mortgage loans for projects like this. He's, I know he recently done a couple very similar projects. That's where he got a lot of his numbers from. According to Mr. Adams, the current interest rate is 4.5 in that neighborhood. He took a conservative approach of 5%. His cost, and we only had a very limited time to look at the numbers that were submitted after 5 o'clock today by PCP, but the big difference really is they're including an extra $7 or $8 million in what they call fixed costs. Well, those numbers, what they call fixed costs, they don't break them down at all. We don't know what they are, other than a generic description. But those numbers are included in the $160 a foot number that Mr. Adams used. So his number includes what they call fixed costs. His number is basically all in. The only numbers that added were extraordinary costs, not for typical development, and those are, well, the environmental cleanup costs, which are not typical, so those are additional. And we took the numbers for the Mark IV submitted in 2011, 150,000 for the water line, which they now say is wrong, it should be 800,000, but that was their number. Granted, it may have increased over the ensuing 7 years, or 8 years, but in the 50,000 traffic column, those were numbers we took from Mark IV's figures. I'll also note that the analysis that was done in 2011 predicted $130 a foot all in for construction. Mr. Adams has 160 today. Just a couple of things about PCP's numbers. Again, they say there's 5-7 million in fixed costs, but they don't break it down. We don't know where they came from. I think they're including some of their legal costs for fighting litigation, which is not appropriate at all to be included in that number. They're saying it should be 5.5%, even though current rates are 4.4, 4.5. We think that's not necessary to be that conservative. They say, oh, well, we didn't include the restaurant. Well, yeah, we didn't include the restaurant. We don't think there should be a restaurant, but the restaurant would only add to their return. So if they added a restaurant, they're going to have a bigger return. So our number is more conservative by not including the restaurant. And I note they only included numbers for the 90. They didn't show us what profits they would make on 167. We don't see that. We don't know what that is. I think it's huge, but we don't have that breakdown. So our view is the big difference in the numbers is really the construction costs. And our number at 160 includes these fixed costs. They're saying about the same number, variable plus this undefined $7-8 million, and that's a big difference. And we think that that's not justified in this case. Again, we challenged the $5 million cleanup costs, which we think was ill-advised and not substantiated. So with that, sure. Okay.
On the PCP letter B, they talk about fixed cost in addition, and that's 7.34.
Well, I don't have a hard copy. Do you have a hard copy of that? I only got an email at, like, when I was driving down the thruway this afternoon at 5:15.
So this letter B that talks about fixed costs in addition to the cleanup total 7.34, that's the cost you're saying are not broken down.
Right. They just generally describe it as site work, you know, sewers, whatever. But we're saying that's in our number of the, was it Alan, 160 foot?
So that,
Yeah, 160.
you want to look later, that's on the second page. And then on the front page of each of FOPB's analysis, you have $160 total, and you're saying the same costs are in that.
Yes, it's part of the 160.
Where's your breakdown to 160 like you want from them? So that we can show people.
We don't have that, but we could, I mean, I guess Alan could give you more of a breakdown. That's just the, I think.
Maybe we're sort of hearing that both of you should give breakdowns.
Yep.
If you want to say that they don't have a breakdown, maybe you should have one.
We could do that, yeah.
We can obviously check with our engineers on what the cost of the water line is, and paving, and these costs that we
Yeah.
all the time. But I don't think it's fair to say, hey, they didn't give us a breakdown unless you're willing to show us how you got 160. We understand the gentleman's experience in the industry, but let's.
Well, we're having.
And I'd ask the same thing of PCP to the extent that they do a follow-up submission, that they similarly show us the cost, and so that everybody can see.
Right.
Rather than just saying, hey, you did this and you did this, let's both of you give us a breakdown.
Right, we're happy to do that. It's just we got this in like 5:15, so we really.
There's none of these questions are intended to be. I'm really just trying to create a record.
Yeah, and frankly, I would, you know, you're the one to give the advice here, but I don't think it would be a bad idea for the village to have some third party look at both sides' numbers. And
As you find out, when Mr. Adams comes up, I've spoken to some crazy.
oh yeah, okay. Right.
One of the things I'd ask you to look at when you do have a chance to sit down and look at
Could
their
you use the mic, please?
Mike, they can't hear you.
Oh, I see. How's that?
Thank you so much.
I've never been told I've been quiet before. One of the things I would ask both you and PCP to consider as you do have a chance to look at their numbers is that you look at those numbers that you agree with so that we can stipulate them into the record. For example, you both use the same income number per square foot, pretty much. You have a number of other numbers that are pretty similar. To the extent my job, the judge's job, is to create a record for the board to consider.
Right.
The more we can have an agreement on.
Yeah, I think they didn't seem to, again, they can speak for themselves, but they didn't seem to quibble with the rent number, our cap rate. They didn't seem to quibble with those, so.
Do you want to let Mr. Adams go, or do you want me to ask you a few more questions that I have for you?
Up to you. Are they legal or are they financial?
They're factual. How's that?
Okay.
When did you first get involved with this? Was it before the decision was made by the board to issue the special use permit?
No.
So your firm got involved afterwards?
After.
Okay.
Because I looked at it and said, where are the brownfield credits? No.
Right, you looked at it. When did you make the request? When did FOPV request of the board the information that you received this week?
I think FOPV, pardon, I think it was asked for many years, am I correct? That FOPV asked for it many, many years ago.
So the problem is that no, they didn't. In fact, the reason you didn't have the information, and I realize you came on later, FOPV never requested this information, and in no time has this village board ever voted that this information was confidential. While the folks at PCP may have felt it was confidential, you never made a FOIL request.
I never.
For the record, we have never turned down a request for this confidential information that the clerk is able to find. If you can find something.
Yeah, it's already been.
No, it hasn't. And
Well,
if
can
you
I?
stand here today and say, hey, you didn't give us the information, that's not correct. If you didn't have this information, it's because you didn't ask for it.
Well, can I?
They may not have had your counsel at that time. We're going to have a record that's accurate.
Well, I think FOPV, but can I?
If you want to submit a FOIL request and a denial that shows that the village board got a FOIL, we'll correct the record.
Mr. Dan, my firm only submitted a request last week. The point of our objections were that all this information was presented in executive session and discussed in executive session, whether we had the hard copy or it was talked about. That was the point of the lawsuit.
Why don't you come over here and use my mic? I'm not using it very well.
My understanding is that FOPV did go into the village hall and ask for information. Is that correct?
Speak for the mic.
If in fact you did, get us a copy and we'll correct the record.
No,
That's not.
can I have a, because you're asking?
The problem with that, ma'am, is that you put on the record that you aren't given stuff, and for the record, you never asked for it. We want to have a record that's accurate for both parties.
We asked for it.
Find out, the court reporter can't record that.
We're off the record right now. Let me know when you're ready to go back on.
We're waiting for him to go back on the record.
So
Okay,
that's-
I'm ready. I would like to, I'm ready. This is Justin from Westro, who was the.
Wait.
Why don't you go ahead?
It's Justin Bleekstra, Vlietstra. So back in the fall of 2012, I personally spent a lot of time trying to understand the project, and Mr. Spitzer is correct. I do not recall submitting a written request for information under Freedom of Information law, but I submitted a verbal request. And also under that law, the village is required, I believe, upon any request to present records for anyone who happens to appear and ask for them. So I went to Village Hall. I asked for a copy to take a look at the record for it. They brought out a large binder for me to take a look at information for the project, I went through the drawings, I went through that, and the documentation was lacking the financial information. I also talked to Mayor Corby and the attorney for the village, Carl Essler, and both of them told me that the financial information was confidential and it was locked up in a safe at Village Hall and they could not disclose it. So that was the status at the time, and if you wanted me to submit an additional written request, I didn't think that was necessary. The information wasn't available.
So I'd like the chancellor here, because I didn't know we were going to relitigate this, okay?
I didn't either.
Well, yeah, well, you weren't.
You raised the issue, you made an allegation about late timing, and you brought it up. We're not gonna have an inaccurate record.
Yeah, so, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm Joe Piccioni, I'm one of the councils for Pittsford Canal Site. So there was an extensive hearing that discussed all these issues, where Mr. Valistra and others gave testimony on each of these points for the court's consideration. The court did not find, I believe based on credible evidence, that there was any indication that any kind of a FOIL request was made either verbally or in writing by FOPV. Furthermore, to respond to some statements that Mr. Knopf said at the beginning, again, I didn't know we were litigating this. We have the court to do that. There's no indication in the court's decision that the village board made the decision about the number of units for this project based upon the financial information, at least solely based upon that information. Nor is there any indication from the court that any consideration by the board was illegal. And in fact, the court says on page 8 of its decision just the opposite. So any statements to the contrary aren't backed up by the record. They're contrary to the record and contrary to the law. We're going to talk about the financial stuff, great. But if we're going to relitigate this, then we'll go back through chapter and verse.
I thank you for indulging me in terms of correcting the record. I think it's fair to say everybody's now had a chance to say what they think the record is on that point, and I thank you.
Right. Okay, so I'd now like to introduce Mr. Adams. You do have his credentials, and he's going to go through the financial analysis that he prepared.
I'm Alan Adams, native Rochesterian, grew up in banking. A number of years ago, I've been doing mortgage banking, mortgage brokerage for many years, and I know Alan Knopf. And what we were asked to do is to take the information that was provided, relative historical information, based on the cabinet letter and a couple of other things, and then check the market for what we consider terms and conditions today. Again, we financed this type of project, put together work with the development group, and we closed about $1.5 billion in this stuff over the years, including a lot of construction on apartments, and we continue to do that. So what I'd like to do, the only thing really, I take the one assumption page we had put out, which assumes the $5 million cleanup cost, the donation, which we have definitions in there, and if they got combined, I think that makes it, there's a lot of variables, but this is one presentation which we put together, and I can kind of run through each of those steps, and each of the, how we came to our, suggested numbers. So, bottom line is this one, the variables we were working with was the project cleanup costs were $600,000, we were given that number. The reported cleanup cost is $5 million, which we used in our analysis. And we talked about a conservation easement, which we were given that information. And if in fact you qualified for COMIDA and the pilot program, that would be the tax abatement program would be the annual cash flow savings in the initial year. Then what we did is we basically took the two scenarios, 167 units, which is the PCP, the proposed number that we were given, and 90, which is the proposed number on the FOPV. The 1,100 square feet per unit size, I believe was agreed by everyone. Then we just calculated the total square footage based on the number of units and the square footage. And that's 183,700 for the PCP and 99,000 for the 90 units. Then we looked at project cost, which sounds like was maybe our biggest variable. We took $160 per square foot, and how we came up with that number, when this was redone in 2011, it was $130. Really no bearing on today other than it was low. And what we did was we recently financed a couple of projects and have talked to some MAI appraisers relative to where the market is on cost. And we were coming in somewhere between 140 and 180 per square foot cost to deliver the product, including infrastructure, physical, building the buildings and soft costs. So that's how we came up with our numbers. The land value we used was $440,000, which we understand was the purchase price. That was a given to us. Sales tax savings, that's if in fact that combined would be $560,000 savings. And we'll see how these numbers fit into the overall equation. We used, and then 10% of the project cost less the land for the brownfield tax credit, which I understand this project would qualify for. Income and expense, we checked the market, talked to a number of people, talked to several MAIs about it, looked at it, and basically came on to $1.75 a square foot. That number could run anywhere from $1.50 to $2, depending on where the project is. So we thought 175 is a pretty fair number. The operating expense ratio, again, was 38%, which everyone agreed upon with those entities. Permanent mortgage loan, we used a 5% rate on a 30-year amortization. This is a construction loan. So you're going to have a year to 2 years floating rate of prime, LIBOR, whatever the number is. But when you get to the permanent mortgage loan, that's where our people go out and get long-term fixed rate financing. Today, that rate, as of 2 days ago, was say 440. Got a quote back from one of our lenders on another $10 million transaction, and it's a 30-year amortization. It's fixed for 10 years at 440. So we looked at it, and we ended up using a 5% rate. So that's really a subject to type of number where right now the rates are dropping. So we're not sure. We used the 5%, which we thought was fair. Debt service coverage 125, and when we talk about going to the permanent market for these products, when we look at this analysis, basically we're talking going to Freddie and Fannie. They're national government agency type entities which fund these loans on a regular basis. And we've done a lot of work with them. So these are their underwriter criteria, and the loan amount is the lesser of the debt service coverage or the project cost based on the timing. I'll get into that. We then, again, and all I can do is report what I put together for my analysis of reviewing the market. I don't know what anybody else has put together at this point. Then what I did was I said, okay, if our total project cost, including $5 million cleanup, PCP numbers, when running it through, and I basically took the 183,700 at 160, came up with 29,000,004 roughly. Added the environmental cost of 5, the water line at 200, redo waterfront at 500. Came up with an adjusted total project cost of 35,092, and then adjusted it for the brownfield tax credit. Came up with 31,006,000 as the total project cost, which is 189,000 per unit. On the flip side, on the 90 unit analysis, ran through the same scenario. The only changes we used, we deducted the $900,000 conservation easement, which may or may not go to both proposals, but we put it in the right side, and the sales tax savings based on Comida. That came down to 20 million and about $1,964,000. Brownfield total cost there was 18,000,001 or about 201,000. So that's kind of how we looked at the cost approach to it. That was based on market information we had. Again, they ranged from $140 a square foot to $180, which I would right down the middle. The next sheet that I had put together under this scenario was the stabilized income and expense. And what we do there is take, again, our total square feet, which at $1.75 generates gross rental income of $3,857,000. We applied the operating expense ratio, which is take your gross income less your expenses to come down to the net operating income. That's a critical number that we use in the lending and appraisal business in driving these things. So under the BCP proposal, it was roughly $2,391,000 of net income, and that is our adjusted net operating income. On the other side, we applied the same scenarios, came up with $1,436,000 on 90 units versus 167 units. The next thing we did, basically, in the permanent market, we did this analysis. If 2 years, once you receive your certificate of occupancy on these projects, from that date, within 2 years, you can go to the permanent market once the project is stabilized. And if you do that, they're limited to 90% of total project costs versus the second analysis, which would be you could go to 75% of value. And so we just ran that through and said our NOI was $2,004,000, cap rate 6, property value was about $40 million, plus the cost 31. So the market value added under the first scenario was $8,200,000 and change. We then drove down and said, okay, if the value is there, we're limited by this 90% rule there. Our loan amount was $28,000,004. We had a 5% rate on a 30-year amortization. You ended up with about a 130, what we call debt service coverage.
I can't hear you.
And then about a 130 debt service coverage. Debt, DEPT, yeah. Give me water. Does anybody water? I tried. That's anyways, the nothing contagious there. Thank you. Okay, I'm sorry. So anyway, what we do is we just run the analysis to make sure it meets the standard of the secondary market. And under that analysis, we were $2,004,000. Our debt service was $1,008,000. Net cash flow was $558,000. Total project cost less the loan meant that the PCP group would still have $3,162,000 of equity in the transaction once they refinanced into the firm, and that equated to about a 17.65 return on investment based on that approach, if you will. We then looked on the other side of it and ran the same scenario as far as the analysis goes, and ended up. This scenario would be, I mentioned, you're set limited to 75. Or not. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. The other scenario where the FOP is, you end up same numbers, about a 21% return on investment, based on what the numbers we ran, subject to having them modified. But that's what we ran. The other thing I was going to mention relative to return on investment, it is important to note that you have on these loans, when you go to the permanent market, you have between 1 and 4 years of interest only that the lenders would allow you to have. So in other words, if I'm at a rate of 4.4%, you don't have to pay anything other than the interest for 1 to 4 years, depending on what you negotiate with Freddie and Fannie. So that's additional way to build cash flows, but that's relevant at either approach, no matter which number of units you have. And then the last thing we did was basically, so that was if you were less than 2 years from certificate of occupancy. And if you go more than after your 2 years from certificate of occupancy, you then can go out and actually, you're limited to the 75% loan to value. And in the scenario we ran, you would have really only about $1.9 million of equity under the PCP and about $278,000 of equity remaining, because the lenders let you take out up to that number, not to exceed 75% loan to value. So that's the approach we took, and those returns are even better. And again, but all of these are, they're subject to variables, and we talked to MAI appraisers, we talked to some builders about the cost, we looked at 2 or 3 other projects we have funded in the near term, and that's how we derived the numbers. So and that was based on what we were given. I didn't have anything other than we had from 2011 by talking to the marketplace. Any questions?
Why don't you start by walking us through the process to get a benefit package? What does it take to get that package? What is and I don't care who answers it. I don't care who answers it. But don't go away. Let's start there. What's the process? What would the village have to do? What would the town have to do? What would the developer have to do?
The process, normally you would go and talk to Monroe County, whatever, imagine Monroe, whatever, the COMIDA, and make an application, you give them financials. In a project like this, normally they normally would only do it if the municipalities all supported it. So if the school board, the town, and the village all supported it, I think it's very likely you would get the COMIDA benefits. If the village and school were against it, I don't think you would get approval. They don't like to go against what the local municipalities do. But then you go to a public hearing, it's approved, and typically there's a 10-year sliding scale on the pilot, but I got a similar project approved for a 13-year pilot on a brownfield for apartments where it, frankly, we had close to 50%, even, I don't know, year 9 or so abatement. It didn't really start dipping down until years 9, 10 through 13. So it was a very aggressive program because we commenced in the other, when I did another brownfield, basically we said because of the extra costs, we needed this. And here I think if the community came together and agreed on a project, I think they would do it to finally resolve this, for sure.
A couple of follow-up questions to that. Given, as you said, the uncertainty of whether it would get approved in part because of boards, including boards that are obviously not here,
Right.
is there a methodology for using a weighted value for determining what benefits a board should consider based on the risk of them being granted or not granted? How would an industry professional go about weighting the likelihood in order to determine, because you used 100%.
Well, we use 0 and 100. We use both scenarios.
Both scenarios. Is there a methodology for weighting it to take that risk into account?
I don't think so. I mean, I can just tell you based on my personal experience going in front of COMIDA, if all the municipalities supported it, would be very likely. If the municipalities didn't support it, it would be very unlikely.
And for the record, to the extent you know, or we have a parade of people up here to tell us otherwise, was the COMIDA potential put into the record at the time that the board made its determination?
I don't know. I mean,
Otherwise, the decision on the record was,
I don't think it was in the,
not an executive session.
yeah, I don't think it was in the public hearing. You know, again, we don't know what happened in executive
With the
session.
exception that, right, with the exception of all those secret meetings that we supposedly had, which I wasn't here for, and apparently neither was anyone else. Do you know of any time where FOPV asked this board to consider benefits that the COMIDA would provide as part of its calculation of determining the mass and scale of the development?
I've been advocating for that for many years.
So you were at these hearings, I'm sorry, I thought you came.
No, I said, maybe you didn't hear my response. I've been advocating for these for
My
many
question
years.
is about the record that's being challenged in this court case. Do you know of any time?
I already answered that. I don't know of any time in the public hearing before the determination was made in 2012 that anyone brought it up. I mean, we can look at the transcript. Yeah, but after.
Okay, I keep forgetting to do that, I'm just gonna hold this thing right here. I don't get yelled at anymore.
But I'll say it's standard, and anybody doing, any experienced developer would know that, and your financial expert from the Cabot Group should have figured that out.
Now that you've seen the materials that he looked at, do you know whether he considered that?
No, he didn't.
Okay. So what you're saying is that one of the things that potentially went into an inaccurate decision on mass and scale was the failure to consider commuter benefits.
Yes.
But mass and scale isn't dependent in any way on density, is it?
It actually is, but I thought you and I weren't arguing here tonight.
I am creating a record based on the allegations that are in this lawsuit that the judge has asked us to look at, and as you pointed out, it was a pretty broad brief. So tell us, since I'm asking you and not the financial analysis, how mass and scale is determined based on density?
The more units you have at a given size, the more the mass and scale. So if I have 90 units at 1,100 square feet, the mass and scale will be smaller than the 167 units of the same size. So, and I know that because I learned that here at Pittsford High School when I took math, so it's pretty simple.
How about if you have 94 bedrooms and 160 studios?
Yeah, I mean, you could mess around with the figures and take unreasonable assumptions, but here everybody knows what kind of project this is. So you made your point in the hearing many, many times. We understand your point. Theoretically, you could have 90 units of 5,000 square feet, and it would be bigger than 167 units of 500 square feet. We can do the math, but being reasonable, everyone knows that this type of project has a certain range of square footage. In fact, everybody here is looking at the 1,100 square feet. To say what you're suggesting, I think, is unreasonable.
Well, I haven't suggested anything other than that the code says the decision's made on mass and scale, doesn't it? He said yes or no question. I know you like giving speeches, but I really am asking you pretty simple yes or no questions.
I believe, I don't have the code in front of me. Do you want, if I'm being quizzed on the code, I guess I could have it in front of me, but I believe that mass and scale is an important factor here, and if you have, it's pretty simple. If you have more units, you're going to have more mass and scale, all other things being the same.
All the things being the same, but in fact, if a board made a decision in private solely on the number of units without specifying the size, you wouldn't know that mass and scale from that number, would you?
Well, I think
Yes or no, sir?
Can you rephrase your question? Yeah, I'm
Yes,
with
he
you.
is. Yes, as a matter of fact, he is. We haven't asked anybody to be on the, they go down to Long Island for this hearing. They've
Oh, really?
gone
Okay. Can you rephrase your question? 'Cause I
Yeah,
didn't
so
quite get
if
it.
you had a number that came out of executive session that wasn't attached to a size per square foot, you wouldn't know from that number what the mass and scale would be of the project, would you?
I think you would, because they proposed a certain size project, so you knew what size units.
And so let's.
I think you're being.
No, I'm actually talking about what the resolution that you argued about that came out of the executive session said. It was a number, it wasn't attached to a size.
Right,
So
but it
I'm
assumed
asking
the
you-
project that was.
Oh, so
being
you were making an
proposed.
assumption that
No, the
assuming
board
the
was.
outside, the board was.
Yeah, I think the answer is pointless. We can argue it in court. I think you've made your point. It's pretty clear. I've made my point. I
So
think we
tell
should
me
move
the
on.
section of the code where it
Can you give me the code?
I'll be happy to, it's on my phone. Show us the section of the code that says that the financial return to the developer is one of the criteria for making the determination of the size of the project.
I think I said, I don't think it's in there. Because, what I'm saying is, I believe the board made its decision. The board made its decision, my understanding is, based upon PCP argued that it was going to be a taking. They had to go in executive session because of the potential of litigation over a taking, because if they didn't get enough units, it was going to be a taking. Implies, and I'm sure I know you're very familiar with the taking jurisprudence, part of the calculus that goes into there is reasonable return, and as I understand it, I wasn't allowed, well, I wasn't part of it, but FOPP wasn't allowed in the executive session, so we don't know exactly what was said. But my understanding is they were arguing they needed a reasonable return. You actually went out and got an expert to look at that and determine whether it was a reasonable return, and he concluded, based on the numbers, not including the brownfield credits, that the 167 units at about, I don't know the exact square footage, at about this size, because he did figure his rents based on so much per square foot and all, it was all in the calculus.
That's correct. So my understanding is, and again, like you, I came in after the fact, but my understanding is they went into executive session because Carl Essler told them this is proprietary data. You're allowed to keep proprietary data since nobody suggested it was, including FOPV, in executive session. Just so you're clear, I'm not asking you to rebut that since you arrived there. But I believe that was the reason Mr. Essler gave on the stand as to why he authorized an executive session, not about the pounding of the table that seemed to happen at every meeting claiming there was a taking.
Well, my understanding, you know, we'd have to read back his testimony, and I don't think anybody in the public wants to hear you recitate what happened at a trial a couple of years ago. But my understanding is that Mr. Essler also contended that that it was due to potential litigation, and that was part of the reason he went into. But
Executive session besides the one where.
Well, I wasn't there. That's part of the problem. FOPV was excluded.
In terms of, again, I don't care who answers the question, taking it back to the property rolling value numbers, you included in here $1 million tax deduction.
Oh, I should explain that, and I explained it in my narrative, and that is just, that's an enhancement. You don't have to include that. That was just one possible scenario, and I made it clear that it was not based on appraisal. So if you discount that because it's just a ballpark estimate, pretty clear. Mr. Adams just took my number, so that number came from me. And the concept was, and I think you were there at the meeting when I suggested it, and you indicated that it was, not the number, but that the concept was possible. And the suggestion is they would donate the waterfront, and they would donate air rights above a certain height, and there was a value to real estate as part of the bundle of rights. You would get an appraisal, you'd get a deduction. Assuming you get, say, 40%, you would get a deduction. What the number is, I don't know. So we're just saying that that is a possible enhancement. Throw it out, don't include it, and you still, no matter what scenario we go under, they're still getting 10% return at a minimum. In some cases, 43, some cases, infinite return.
So you understand my confusion, and by the way, I believe the gentleman said it was the purchase price, actually the 420.
Oh, it was the appraisal, that was incorrect.
So there's an appraisal for $440,000, of which $1 million can be donated for air rights.
No.
So where does the $1 million come from?
That's after you're approved. You actually, I'm sure you've worked with a lot of development. When you get approvals and have development approved, you actually increase the value of the property. So after you do that, your property with more units and more is worth more. So if you donate your right to go higher and build, you would get a deduction based upon giving up the air rights. That is, you know, real thing. What the number is, I don't know, but it's more than the basis in the, you know, it's worth more than the basis in the property. The 440, we tried to figure out what the price they paid, but they reported no transfer tax, but they did assume mortgages, but they didn't report the balance of the mortgages. So I couldn't figure out what the price was, but the appraisal was for
that income tax deduction.
Yes.
We had the joy of fighting with the IRS over these things.
Okay.
One of the things you have to show is that you actually are giving up something that you could have gotten. Would FOPV have supported a development on the waterfront, 4.5 stories?
No.
Then how could you say that they were giving up anything?
Well, the village approved it already.
Well, it's not 4.5 stories on the waterfront, though, is it?
I mean, the village gave an approval. I think some of it was 4 stories.
On the waterfront, in the section that you're talking
No,
about?
no. I mean, you didn't understand the scenario.
I'm only talking about your $1 million tax deduction.
Yeah, and again, you can throw that out in the numbers. Still are correct. But what I'm saying is that.
Not worry about it anymore?
No, I'm just saying that it's a possible enhancement. But what I didn't say 4.5 stories on the waterfront. I said the waterfront, because as we all know, waterfront property is more valuable than other property, and an easement, a vertical easement, so there's two different things, so I think you're fudging them together.
No, I'm not. I'm trying to understand exactly what it is because you're talking about donating a portion of the fee.
Right.
You use the number.
But you agree you could donate part of the fee,
I don't disagree
and you
with that.
agree it would have some value.
If in fact it could have some value, but in this situation, I find it beyond comprehension that anybody thinks that along the waterfront, this body would approve a 4.5-story building.
I didn't say they would.
Well, as I understood it, the restriction was everything above 2 stories. Specifically, your letter says for an easement for air rights to prohibit development above 2 stories.
Right, but not the waterfront I was talking about was the land.
Okay, but if I'm willing to give them 2 stories, and I'm not willing to give them 2.5 above that, then that has no value for a donation, does it?
FOPV isn't the one approving it, the village board is.
Now, the IRS is actually, when you're talking about that
Well,
tax deduction,
all right.
I can tell you that you cannot get credit for something that is not likely or will ever be approved.
I don't know, I've done cases where people have donated farming rights, or their development rights of farms that might never have been approved. They got huge deductions from IRS. I've seen many times where people have donated easements and gotten substantial deductions. So,
Can you give us an example where somebody's donated the top 2.5 stories of allowable space on the Erie Canal waterfront in Pittsford? Well, no, that's, you brought this up, you came up with.
no, I'm saying you're not gonna have the exact situation, obviously.
Okay, if you want to simply withdraw the $1 million, we will, but you put this into your analysis that you want the board to consider, and you can't answer me any question about A, where you got the number from, or B, how you got the number, or even how you decided that their tax rate was 40%.
Well, no, I'm not saying their tax rate is 40%. We're talking about a reasonable developer. The issue on reasonable return is a reasonable developer, not this particular developer. So if this particular developer decided to spend $5 million on cleanup and a reasonable developer would have...
We're only talking about the income tax deduction, which you said is an estimated savings of $400,000.
Well, I think the 40% is pretty fair in the marketplace for a developer for a deduction. I think
But you
that's
have
what...
no appraisal or anything?
I said that. It's in my letter, no appraisal. That's just a ballpark number. It's not.
Give us an example, and I certainly agree with you that portions of the fee can be donated, particularly development rights. But I also know from fighting with the IRS that they will not give you credit if in fact those development rights are more mythical than reality.
Mhm.
And I don't know anybody in this community who thinks that a 4.5-story building would be approved on the waterfront, which is the strip that you were talking about.
No.
It says a strip of land allow waterfront development. Reading your letter.
Right. Well, there's two things I'm talking about. I think you don't understand. I'm talking the waterfront, and I'm talking the rest of the property, the height.
So you're
But
talking
I think
about-
you're pounding this into.
Well, you put this into the record, and I have to admit that I didn't really quite understand where you got it from, so I'm just trying to figure out.
I said, quote, ballpark.
This number was, okay. Yeah.
While we do not have this is my words, while we do not have an appraisal of the value of this donation, we have, quote, ballpark, unquote, it as $1 million for discussion purposes, with an estimated savings of $400,000 income taxes. Okay? So I thought that was pretty clear. Okay. But as I've said, you take that out of the analysis, no matter what you do. I mean, you can take out the Comida, you can take out the donation, we can take out the grants. You still, no matter what you do, you still get, even with the $5 million of cleanup costs without money back from Village Gate or Village Green, you still get a 10% return.
Okay, so let's talk about, I think this is Mr. Adams. In your various projections, you came up with a property value analysis using a cap rate of 6%. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so again, I want to walk through the process. You build a development, you're going back to the bank hires an appraiser.
That's correct.
The appraiser uses the USPAP standards, correct?
Not sure what you mean.
Well, USPAP is the state law requires us the standards from the Appraisal Institute,
Right.
that every appraiser in New York uses, which I remember, it's a United, I forget what USPAP stands for, but I'm happy to cite it to you. That's what,
Only
cap rate with an appraisal in New York, aren't you required to add the tax rate to the cap rate to get the number that you use to develop what the market value is? Isn't that how appraisals do it?
We got the cap rate as an all-in cap rate from appraisal people we work with. We didn't figure out how you calculate that. The cap rate basically is the market value of the project sold for and the return on the investment. You come up with, that's how you derive your market cap rate.
Okay, but actually, don't you also add the tax rate into that? I mean, go back and look at some of your appraisals.
It's factored in.
It's factored in. How come when I spoke to 3 appraisers today, they told me the typical cap rate of apartments in Western New York is, with the taxes in there, between 12 and 14%.
Well, that's, number one, is ridiculous.
Well, you're thinking of the cap rate in terms of.
That's the number I work with. The cap rate is the capitalization rate, which take your net operating
So
income
you could
and
provide us
convert
a
it to
copy
the.
of an appraisal without showing us any details of any project. You can get a cap rate page of appraisal that's been accepted by a bank with a cap rate by an MAI appraiser showing a 6% all-in rate.
That's correct. Yes, I can.
That really gets to the
Well,
value.
I'll give you a number if you like, if I can find it, how's that? Because I deal with this every day, I talk to MAIs every day on how do you value a property, and if you looked at an MAI appraisal, you'll see what the numbers are.
Look at lots of them. That's why I called several appraisers and asked them what are they giving for cap rates. I had one today, and it literally, I can show it to you on my phone afterward. And the cap rate that they were using for a project was with the tax rate in there. This is the return on the investment, the return of the investment, and the tax rate. Basically, it's a series of rates they use that they build up using mortgage rates. There's a formula that they go through that is really great.
Approaches, but that's the band of investment. Basically, this would be driven by the market value, especially on a quality project like this, with a quality group like Mark for development with that location. You would command a 6 cap rate on this project. I'm going to Pittsford, Pennsylvania right now. $17 million project, 5.5 cap rate. So Rochester is not quite where Pittsburgh is. 5.5. I talked to MAI. That's what we used in MAI's.
I think you're thinking of a different cap rate than the cap rate.
Well, we might be. Well, that case.
I'm looking about the section of the appraisal where they come to the income capitalization method for, as opposed to what the investor's looking for when is discounted cash flow. I'm not talking about the discounted cash flow cap rate. I'm talking about the appraiser's income capitalization for assessment purposes, which is also what a bank uses.
Yeah.
And they get-
What a bank uses is this cap rate I'm talking about, okay? Well, you question it, but I can tell you that's what they do. That's what the lenders.
Can I ask you to send me some, that way we have.
Yeah, in fact, I think you're confusing the appraisal you would use for a tax assessment case or a condemnation case with the analysis that's done by people like Mr. Adams and the banks for financing. They're different. You're kind of mixing apples and
It
oranges.
could be the appraisal. I specifically asked appraisers today who were approved by large local banks, what they use.
Yeah, I think you're right.
That's appropriate, you're right.
Well,
Yeah.
you asked an appraiser, an appraiser told you 12% today, they wouldn't be in business
Well,
because no
again,
projects would
remember,
be
they're adding
sold.
the tax rate in, which you barely did.
You don't need to, and that's not what the lenders lend against, or the lenders or Freddie and Fannie accept from an underwriter. That, I can assure you, is the correct number.
In terms of the operating ratio, we're actually fairly close to where the numbers were that came in this afternoon. Where did you get 38% from?
That was a number that was given to me both from the Cabot report and I think both.
That was what DeMarzo, Chris DeMarzo told us when we met, that they were at 38%.
If they submitted a document today that said the correct rate was between 40 and 42%, what would that do to your numbers if you used, say, 42%? Would it make a marginal difference?
You lower your net operating income, which will lower your value.
What does that do to your non-infinite return?
Well, it lowers the return.
Lowers the-
Infinite return, all infinite return means is you have no cash left in the transaction if you refinance. Is what it means. You recapture all your equity.
So you got, that's where you got that rate. And again, as I asked Alan earlier, to the extent you all can stipulate, yeah, that's the number between yourselves afterward, it's gonna make life a lot easier for everybody in terms of the record. explain how the brownfield, or Alan can explain it since he's the brownfield?
The cost is not based on the amount of cleanup. The cost is based upon the brownfield tax credit, Alan can expand on this, is based on the value of the project, or the cost of the project less the land. Is that correct?
And that's just, again, I understand that. So what you're saying is that the reason that there are two separate numbers is because they, there's two different costs of the project. If you spend less on the project, you have less on the brownfield credit. Okay. They submitted a number today of a brownfield credit of $3,035,000 as opposed to your $2,004,000. Does that seem completely out of line to you? And obviously, they have more information than you do.
I haven't seen their information, but I would presume.
And obviously, they've submitted a number that's more in, if you will, FOPV's favor, if there's a higher brownfield tax credit.
Well, if in fact that would be favorable to both, if the costs are higher, less the land, obviously the brownfield tax credit is higher for either scenario, right?
Yeah, if I can just, the brownfield credit is based on the amount you spend. So if you have a bigger project, normally, if you have more units, not only more massive scale, you have more expense. So if you have more expense, your credit is higher. The credit on, the tangible credit is going to be 10%. We assume the credit on the cleanup was 10%. If they're in generation 2, they actually would get 28% on the cleanup, but we use the more conservative 10% number.
While you personally disagree with their methodology of how they went about it, clearly the number that they've given us is something that can be documented that, yes, they got $3 million.
No, because they wouldn't have got it yet. It's a projected number.
It's a projected.
Well, they have two numbers. They should be able to tell us exactly what they got for site preparation. That's based on the cleanup. So I'm not sure if they qualify, because I didn't have all the documentation, for the 10% or the 28%. We use 10% to be conservative, but that number they should have got. So we should know what that number is. The other number is, you don't get it until after you build your project and you know what your costs are, then you file your tax return and claim 10%. So it's variable depending on the size of the project.
Now that you know the actual cleanup cost of $5 million.
I don't know that.
Okay. Do you have a reason to doubt that they're $5 million?
Yes.
So you don't think they actually spent that?
Because I think I think they might have gotten reimbursed something. I don't know that. I know there was a lawsuit. It went to the appellate division. It was resolved against Pittsford Village Green over this drain. I don't know what happened.
But you have no idea of any of the damages that they collected or even
I don't know.
the cleanup costs. In fact, it could have just been, and I don't know either, but it could have just been their cost in cleaning up the flood that Pittsford Village allegedly caused.
Right, but the flood was part of their cleanup costs.
Well, you don't know that if you don't know what the $5 million is, though, do you?
Excuse me. I have no doubt, and in fact, Chris DeMarzo said it, that some of their costs was getting rid of the water that filled in the hole. That would be part of your site preparation costs. Whether the water was clean or contaminated, it was part of their site prep costs.
So you're, I think it's fairly well recognized, a legal expert on the brownfield.
Thank you. One of the nicest things you said to me tonight, Dan.
If you spend $5 million and you got $1 million back from another party, are you allowed to claim $5 million or $4 million?
Actually, I think you are allowed to. I think you are allowed to claim the $5 million. I think probably you're right that you would get the $5 million. Just the $1 million should go into the financials, though, because you got a rebate of $1 million. But I think you probably are right that if you actually, it depends on who wrote the check. But if PCP wrote the check, then I think they would get the credit.
Okay, so I think you got to where I was going. If they got a payment that went against their fixed cost should be in that after legal expenses and engineering expenses and trial expenses, whatever the net of that judgment was, would be against the fixed cost of developing the site.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it might, earlier I said it could be zero. I mean, it might have been zero. I don't know.
In terms of the you allow that you would provide us the cost of the square foot, you would provide us a breakdown. And you'll be able to confirm that it includes utilities, erosion control measures, grading, road and sidewalks, site lighting, the village required historic site lighting, as you know, professional fees and inspection costs, not including litigation, docks and promenade for public use, granite curbing, that the enhanced landscaping that we require, the streetscape improvements that we require, the high-end architectural details that we required, and the materials required by the village code. You will be able to show us, I'm sure, that it includes building a parking garage under the building, that it includes balconies, that it includes the high-end mechanicals that they propose, the high-end appliances and finishes for to get the price range that we both agreed on that they can get, and the high-efficiency windows that are required for the village, right? You'll be able to show that all those costs are in that 160? Or maybe you don't know.
We don't know. We got those numbers basically from, again, reviewing 3 other projects that we had worked with and reviewed, and again, it came to 130 a square foot way back in 11, but we thought that was a reasonable number. It may be higher. We're willing, of course, we're willing to review that. And
on those 3 other projects where you got the 160 figure from, where were those projects located?
in Rochester.
So, where in Rochester, in the city?
No, one was in Victor, and one was in Rockport.
So did you kind of just do like an informal average? You took, you know, I think you said some 140, 180, and then you just kind of...
Yeah, and I talked to some appraisers relative to cost, and it was an estimate. Yeah, I did. It was an estimate.
Did you look at the one in Penfield too?
Which one was that? Yes, yeah, we did.
Since both parties have promised to submit a backup, I, by the way, have absolutely no idea what it costs to build any of those things. I do know something about water lines. Do you know how long that Sutherland water line is that was the extra cost? Do you know how long that Sutherland water line is, that extra cost?
I don't think either one of us know off the top of our head. We just, again, we used the number that was in the record from Mark 4 from 2011 of 150,000. That's the number we used.
They've given us a number of 800,000, and I know you haven't had a chance to.
Yeah, we saw it at 550, but yeah.
I know. Obviously, you haven't had a chance, and you'll certainly have a chance to respond. Assume the number is 800. Assume, and I'm not asking you to do this tonight, I'm sorry, I should preface that. Assume their numbers on cost are correct. Can you redo your estimate to show?
Of course. Yeah, I'm sorry. Of course, we'll redo it. We want it to be as accurate as we can. That what we had presented is what we had derived from the market, and if in fact it's higher, of course we'll use those numbers. Let's do the analysis. And
how did you get the 1,100 square foot average? Where does that come from?
that was a given to me. I thought that was agreed upon by both parties. 1,100 square feet.
I don't think anything's been agreed upon by both parties.
That was in the document.
I think that's when we had our settlement meeting, that's what was discussed, and I think we also he also looked at typical apartment sizes for similar projects, but, you know, I mean, if you made them 1,200 square foot, obviously the numbers change. If you made them 1,000 square foot, the numbers are gonna change. You're not likely to make them 3,000 square feet. It's not gonna happen in this month.
Right. But you can do things in high-end apartments like cathedral ceilings on the top floor, correct?
Right, but we're also looking at reasonable, I think we're looking at the reasonable return. You know, I mean, if you do add-ons, your rent's probably gonna be higher too. So, you know, so if you want us to gross it up to make it more top of the line, then I think your rent may go up too. So,
I totally agree. My question is, if you make it more top of the line, what does it do to the scale and mass, which is
Well, I guess if you make cathedral ceilings, probably you can have a little more mass, if I understand what you're saying.
That's correct. It's not density at that point, then it's scale of mass, right?
Or you're back to the same thing, Dan. We got a good point. I disagree.
Okay. In terms of the number of units at different sizes, how does that affect the parking? If, for example, you had 90 studios versus 90, I lived in a studio, I think it was smaller than 1,100 feet. But how does having different size apartments affect the cost of all the other amenities?
With the larger units, I'm sure the cost will be higher as well.
No, I'm talking about the non-unit side. I'm talking about things like, for example, if you have a 3-bedroom, don't you have to have more parking?
I'm not sure what the village code is. I mean, that'd be whatever the code requires.
Did you look at the code to determine?
No, I did not.
So you came up with the site numbers without determining whether or not the code corresponded to, in effect, the construction cost you were submitting.
That's correct.
Okay?
Okay.
But
I mean, what is the code? You're saying the code requirement? What is the code requirement, Dan?
I have no idea. I'm just asking.
Is there a code? There's a code.
Yes, there's definitely a parking requirement.
Yeah, I mean, is it 2 per unit or?
It depends on the size of the unit, doesn't it? Or is it just per unit?
Well, I'll tell you what we'll do is he was looking at comparable developments,
Right.
so we'll go back and look at the code, see what the requirement is, see how that matches up against the square footage and the type of unit, and see if that requires an adjustment or not. He was going on typical cost.
So, Bob, question for you, as I recall, the approved plan had parking underneath. And the other 3, just to make sure you add apples and apples, all 3 of your other comparables all had parking underneath, right?
2 of them had parking underneath, 1 did not.
One of them did not. And what do you think that makes a difference cost-wise, so the board knows what they're looking at?
I couldn't estimate that. It might be $20, $30 a square foot, but I'm not sure. I'd have to review that.
Do you remember whether the 2 who had underneath parking were the more expensive ones?
Yes, they were. Sure.
So how much was the average of those 2 per square foot?
I'm not sure, but I'll get that for you.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, you think the reason.
I don't think the board has a problem with that. How does the board feel about that? I mean, again, you can see where I'm left here, it's not, I'm just trying to get
Just
some
to give you more questions.
Well, no, I'm actually pretty much done, but
I have another.
what I'm after here is, and I apologize to you if you're upset that I brought these up, but you made accusations that were inaccurate in the letter about what the case is about, and we're not gonna have a record that's one-sided. So, what else?
Well, again, I wouldn't call them accusations. I usually make legal arguments, and you do. I don't feel it's proper to characterize them as accusations. I have one view, you have another view. I disagree that my arguments were wrong. I think they were right, but that's for the judge and whatever. So I don't think it really serves for us to be arguing over those issues. I think, unless Chuck wants to get in an argument
You're always
now.
accusing us of something, Alan, so. Mr. Adams, I have a question for you on the last page of your letter. You set up this chart based on the various scenarios. You have the number of units, whether or not it considers the enhancements, then the letter that you wrote. And then you have like a column for environmental response costs based on the different scenarios. And then as you move to the right, the different return on investments that you're projecting, going anywhere from infinite to, I think, 10.44%. When you're talking about the infinite return and ROI in the amount of like 30 or 43%, where does that fit in your experience on profitability per project? Is that barely scraping by? Is that doing really, really well? In your experience, where does this fit on the scale?
Depending on which category you're
We'll
looking
take
at.
an infinite return. Is that typical? Is that typical?
Well, it's not untypical if you get a project that you season for 2 years, you generate enough income, and you use a 6 cap rate or whatever cap rate's reasonable, maybe 5.5.
So this would be on a
You
very
can't
high
go out,
end.
the lender will lend you as long as you don't exceed 75% of value. You technically could get, if you spent $30 million on a project, you could get a loan for $30 million. As long as you had the 125 debt service, not to exceed 75 loan to value. Therefore, you don't have any money left in the transaction. It's an equity, effectively, you're getting your equity back because the project is economically strong enough to support that. You can't do that for 2 years, but after 2 years, if it's stabilized, you could do that. That's where the infinite return means you have the money left in the transaction. Equity.
Okay, what about the 43% and the 103.32%? Is that at the higher level of profitability for this type of development in
Yes.
your experience?
That is.
Would you say like maybe like, you know, the top 5%, 10%?
I would say the, and these are some variables in there, but typically what we've seen is 8 to 12% cash on cash is recognized as good with a,
Right.
with a little higher internal rate of return, maybe, 18 to 20%, depending on the project and the investor.
So under your scenarios and your analysis and reviewing this project, you see this as being about 4 times the average profitability. That's what you are thinking, roughly.
Well, that's what the numbers showed. That's what the numbers showed based on $160 a square foot and $1.75. And I assume what we're going to do is modify our expenses based on. It'd be nice if we could get the support from as to what it's going to cost that we can utilize to confirm those numbers and put those in our analysis as well.
So you based the net operating income based on market rates, basically market cost, market rents?
The net operating income is based on the net, the $1.75 a square foot, which is market rent. On the high end, it's market rent, and less the 38% operating expense, less the 5% vacancy, 38% operating expense ratio, which is your net operating income. That's the key number that drives the valuation process.
Okay. What happens when a developer spends more money than they should? Let's say, seems like every developer runs into a tar pit or something. It's not uncommon to have extra costs. Let's assume in a $30 million project that you've got extra costs. In this case, they're obviously asserting that they ran into issues related to cleanup that they didn't expect. Alvin has some concerns whether those are legitimate considerations, but obviously it does happen.
Sure.
When you're the developer and you actually spend that cash, even if it's cash on those dirty lawyers, don't you have to get that back?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And isn't therefore then what the board should be looking at based on what they actually spent and actually occurred rather than an appraisal based on market values that may not be realistic?
Well, that's what the developer would want to do for sure. And then if it's, number one, if these cost overruns occur during construction, you're already out the gate, so construction was in process, right? If in fact the expenses are realized before you start construction, either you put more equity in the deal or you don't do the deal, or you raise your rents. One of the three can adjust your net income, which eventually affects your return on investment.
And so in reality, at the end of the day, the developer, when they come in to a board for a variance or for whatever, they're based on what they're actually spending as opposed to what, hopefully they can get market rents, hopefully their expenses.
Your total project cost is based on what they spend, of course, yeah, that's
So
true.
if they spend more money, that's really the number that's relevant for our discussion. Isn't it?
Absolutely.
But that's the number that determines their actual return.
Yes.
We were addressing what a reasonable return would be. So I think that's a different question. What a third, because if the question is reasonable return, which we dispute whether it's even relevant.
It's not in the code, so why is that the question?
I said if. If the question is reasonable return, then you're looking at a third party coming to the property and saying, what return can I get on this investment? So the actual, it's really the expected scenario, the expected cost, not necessarily what actually happens.
No, I disagree. When this developer comes in and says to the village, here's what I need in order to make a living, which is what the discussion was, no matter how you phrase it, it's actual cost.
No, well, they came in and said, we're gonna have 600,000 in cleanup costs.
I understand their numbers may have changed. and
So
they
that's
looked
what I
at
think.
numbers, But you were incorrect, and you're not gonna keep changing my questions. I asked him about actual cost. You clearly wanna change the question, because that board makes its decision based on what is presented to it, including this record. And this developer had actual costs, correct? I mean, they had actual costs. And since it's not in the code, it's really up to this board to decide which standard it wants to use, reasonable, actual, or market cost, correct? Go ahead, try to answer one of these as a yes.
Well, I object to the form of the question. You gave me three. I think it's a reasonable return was the question presented to the board back in 2011, but I wasn't in the executive session. Nobody else from FOPV was, so we don't really know.
And you weren't also in the other meetings, so you don't know what was raised by the citizens other than to the extent you memorized the transcripts.
Well, we did read the transcripts and read some of the minutes, and some of the minutes were accurate, some weren't. So.
Are you aware of any cases that indicate where we're not in a variance situation? What?
No, I
The board is to evaluate, we all agree the actual hazard right density is 25 per acre, and we're all way underneath that, correct?
I know we're under the actual, I'd have to pull out the code again. You're quizzing me on the code, and I don't have it in front of me.
But the code is 25 per acre. So we're well beneath that. Therefore, the board has the right to make a reasonable standard, but it doesn't have to be reasonable value if the developer shows its actual value.
Yeah, we were addressing what we thought the board addressed back in 2011, 2012. That's what we were addressing.
Does anyone on the board have any questions? Anything that we think we missed? Any iota of dust that we haven't argued over?
Can I just note that the case was on open meetings law, not FOIL? Just want to put that in the record.
That's because you failed to do a FOIL request, which is why you.
All right. We're going to go another 20 minutes there, please.
Or else they never use it, not practice. Does PCP wish to make any statements tonight?
If we're done, and if PCP is going to present, I would suggest we give people a 5 or 10 minute recess just to get out of the lights and stand up and stretch.
Mayor, hold me to this. We're not going to be very long at all.
Okay.
All right. Now you can hold the, how's your neck? So, we're not gonna. It's on, I gotta turn it. I was trying to censor you, Jeff.
No? Okay, just a couple of quick comments. For the reasons that everyone's heard tonight, including under the questioning from board's counsel, I don't believe the information that FOPV has provided is not credible, doesn't go to any of the issues, and most importantly, doesn't go to the issues that underline the reason for the meeting, which from the decision itself talked about mass and scale vis-a-vis purported BCP and LWRP benefits. So that's one observation. Secondly, using words like ballpark and typical in that kind of analysis, again, underlines the fact that the information is not credible and certainly doesn't go for to the reasons that the judge asked that this meeting or demanded that this meeting take place. We're going to rely on our submission. We look forward to seeing additional information and to responding to it. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you all for your patience. Yeah, I think the board was not voting. Why don't we
So moved.
for that time.
Do I have a second? We have a second? Trustee Stetser? Trustee Lanfear? I vote aye. Trustee Keating? Aye. Trustee Galusha?
I have, there's my motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second? All in favor? Aye.